The judgment hall fell silent as the heavy doors sealed shut. Jake Morrison stood in chains at the center of the circular chamber, surrounded by towering Zylkran nobles, whose crystalline skin shimmered under the cold blue lights. Queen Elara sat motionless on her throne, her 4 eyes fixed on the human before her. She had presided over 1,000 executions, but something felt different today. "The charges are clear," Lord Thane announced, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. "Espionage, sabotage of Imperial resources, conspiracy against the Empire. The penalty is death." Jake kept his head high despite the energy restraints burning his wrists. He'd been caught trying to free other human prisoners from the labor camps. He knew what came next. Every human did. The Zylkran Empire had conquered Earth 40 years ago, and humans had been second-class citizens ever since. Disposable. Replaceable. Queen Elara raised one slender hand. "Captain Voss, execute the sentence." Kaida Voss stepped forward from her position at the Queen's right. The elite guard captain stood nearly 7 feet tall, her armor gleaming, her reputation for efficiency legendary. She had never hesitated before, never questioned an order, but today her hand did not reach for her weapon. "No, my queen." The chamber erupted. Nobles shouted in outrage. Guards shifted nervously. Lord Thane's face darkened to a deep purple, his rage barely contained. Queen Elara remained perfectly still, but her eyes narrowed dangerously. "Repeat that, Captain." Kaida stepped closer to Jake, positioning herself between him and the throne. "I will not execute this human. I have spent the last 3 months studying their species in secret. We have been wrong about them, Your Majesty. Catastrophically wrong." "Treason!" Lord Thane hissed. "Guards, arrest her immediately." "Wait!" Queen Elara's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. She leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued, despite the breach of protocol. "You have 60 seconds before I have you both killed." Kaida's voice remained steady. "Humans possess cognitive abilities we lack. Not raw intelligence, but adaptability, creative problem-solving. They see solutions where we see only obstacles. 3 months ago, I gave this human access to the Keratin strategic puzzle, the one our war college has failed to solve for 6 years. He solved it in 4 hours. "Impossible," Lord Thane spat. "The human is lying, or you coached him." Jake finally spoke, his voice calm despite his situation. "The solution requires thinking in nonlinear patterns. You were trying to solve it with logic and established military doctrine. I used chaos theory and psychological manipulation instead. Your enemies aren't computers. They're living beings with predictable irrationalities." Queen Elara stood abruptly. The entire court fell silent. She descended the steps of her throne platform with deliberate slowness, her flowing robes trailing behind her. When she reached Jake, she studied him with an intensity that made even the guards uncomfortable. "You solved the Keratin puzzle?" "Yes, Your Majesty. Show me." Kaida activated a holographic display in the center of the chamber. The 3-dimensional battlefield appeared, showing defensive positions, supply lines, and enemy movements. Jake walked her through his solution, pointing out psychological vulnerabilities, timing windows, and unconventional tactics that exploited enemy assumptions rather than their weaknesses. When he finished, Queen Elara was silent for a long moment. Finally, she turned to her senior military advisor, General Corvin. "Would this solution work?" The general's skin flickered with embarrassment. "Yes, Your Majesty, it would. I ran the simulation last night after Captain Voss showed me. Complete victory with minimal casualties." Lord Thane slammed his fist on his armrest. "This proves nothing. One puzzle does not erase his crimes or validate his worthless species. Execute them both and be done with this farce." Queen Elara returned to her throne, her expression unreadable. "You're right, Lord Thane. One puzzle proves nothing, which is why I'm authorizing Captain Voss's proposal." Kaida bowed deeply. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "Wait," Jake interrupted. "What proposal?" Queen Elara's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. "Captain Voss came to me yesterday with an offer, a wager. She proposed that you lead a team on a mission that has defeated our best warriors for 10 years. The Vorath Fortress on the border moon. Every assault has failed. Thousands of our soldiers have died trying to breach its defenses. Jake felt his stomach drop. That's a suicide mission. Precisely. If you succeed, I will reconsider our treatment of human prisoners across the Empire. If you fail, you and Captain Voss will both be executed for treason. You have 72 hours to assemble a team from the human prison population and complete the mission. Queen Elara leaned forward. Do you accept? Jake looked at Kaida, who met his gaze with absolute certainty. He thought about the thousands of humans suffering in labor camps, about the children born into slavery, about the slim chance that this insane mission might actually change something. I accept. Lord Thane rose from his seat. Your Majesty, this is madness. You're gambling the Empire's credibility on the performance of slaves. No, Lord Thane. I'm testing a hypothesis. If humans are truly as worthless as we've believed, the mission will fail, and we lose nothing but criminals. If Captain Voss is correct, we may discover an untapped resource. Either way, we'll have our answer. She turned back to Jake. You leave in 6 hours. Choose your team wisely. The Judgment Hall cleared quickly after that. Jake found himself in a transport with Kaida, heading toward the prison complex. His mind raced through possibilities, tactics, and the overwhelming certainty that he was about to die. Why? He finally asked. Why risk your life for this? Kaida stared straight ahead. Because I was at the Carradine front 5 years ago. I watched 10,000 Zylkran soldiers die in a battle we should have won. If we'd had one human advisor, one person who could think differently, they'd all still be alive. I'm tired of watching people die because of arrogance. That's not the whole truth. She turned to look at him then, and for the first time, he saw something vulnerable in her expression. My brother was killed in the Battle of Meridian Station. The enemy used a simple trick, a psychological feint that exploited our predictable response patterns. A human prisoner tried to warn the commander. He was ignored and executed for speaking out of turn. 3 hours later, my brother was dead. Jake said nothing. There was nothing to say. The transport arrived at the prison complex, a massive facility that housed over 50,000 human captives. Kaida's security clearance got them inside without questions. Jake walked through corridors he'd never seen before, past cells holding engineers, pilots, soldiers, and civilians who'd resisted the occupation. I need a pilot, Jake said, scanning the files Kaida provided. Someone who can think in 3 dimensions under pressure. Maya Torres, Kaida suggested, pulling up a profile. Former Earth Defense Force. Shot down 7 Zylkran fighters before her ship was disabled. Been in solitary for 2 years after 3 escape attempts. Jake studied the woman's photo. Hard eyes, set jaw, scars on her face from poor medical care. She'll work. I also need an engineer, someone who understands Zylkran technology but thinks like a human. Ben Clark. Worked on the integration team after the conquest. Tried to sabotage a weapons facility. Brilliant mind diagnosed with something you call autism spectrum disorder. His pattern recognition abilities are exceptional. Perfect. Get 'em both. I'll need 3 more. Combat specialists, who won't freeze under fire. Over the next 4 hours, Jake assembled his team. Maya Torres agreed immediately when she heard the terms. Ben Clark asked 17 technical questions before nodding his acceptance. The combat specialists, Leo Grant, Nina Ross, and Carlos Mendez, were harder sells. They'd all watched friends die on impossible missions before. Why should we trust you? Leo asked, his arms crossed over his massive chest. For all we know, this is just another way to get rid of troublemakers. Jake met his eyes. Because if we pull this off, it changes everything. Not just for us, but for every human in the Empire. And if we fail, at least we go down fighting instead of rotting in a cell. Nina laughed bitterly. You really think the Queen will keep her word? Captain Voss thinks so, and she's betting her life on it too. Carlos stepped forward. I'm in. I'd rather die doing something that matters than wait for execution anyway. The others agreed one by one. 6 hours after the judgment, Jake's team boarded a stealth transport headed for the Vorath fortress. Kaida provided them with weapons, armor, and detailed intelligence on the fortress defenses. The Vorath are a warrior species, she explained as they studied the holographic displays. They value honor above pragmatism. Every assault has followed the same pattern: direct frontal approach, overwhelming force, superior firepower. They've countered every tactic because they expect rational military strategy. So we don't give them rational military strategy, Maya said, her eyes lighting up. We give them chaos. Ben was already running calculations on his datapad. God, the fortress has 17 defensive layers, but they all assume attackers want to preserve the structure. What if we don't care about structural integrity? Jake smiled. What are you thinking? This central power core. It's shielded against direct attack, but the cooling system has to vent excess heat. If we could introduce a cascade failure in the thermal regulation, the automated systems would prioritize saving the core. That means pulling power from the defensive shields for exactly 47 seconds. 47 seconds isn't enough time for an assault, Leo objected. It is if we're already inside, Jake countered. We don't attack from outside. We get captured on purpose. The team stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Kaida tilted her head, her interest clearly piqued. Explain. The Vorath take prisoners for interrogation. They have a processing facility in the outer ring. Minimal security because nobody would be stupid enough to surrender voluntarily. We go in as refugees, claim we escaped from a labor camp and need asylum. They'll take us to processing. Once we're inside, Ben creates the thermal cascade. During the shield failure, Maya flies the transport through the opening and extracts us, along with whatever prisoners they're holding. Nina shook her head. That's insane. There are 1,000 ways that could go wrong. Yeah, Jake agreed. But they'll never see it coming because it's completely irrational. No military commander would deliberately get captured. Carlos grinned. I love it. It's stupid enough to work. They spent the next 18 hours refining the plan. Ben calculated precise timing windows. Maya studied the fortress layout to plan her extraction route. The combat specialists prepared for the inevitable firefight once the Vorath realized they'd been tricked. As they approached the border moon, Jake felt the weight of what they were attempting. This wasn't just about proving human worth. It was about changing an empire's entire worldview. No pressure. The Vorath fortress loomed ahead, a massive structure bristling with weapons. Maya piloted the transport with precision, deliberately damaging their own ship to make the refugee story more convincing. They broadcast distress signals and pleas for asylum. The Vorath response was immediate. A tractor beam locked onto their ship and pulled them into the outer docking bay. Guards surrounded them the moment they exited, weapons trained on every member of the team. The interrogation officer was a hulking creature with thick armor plating and cold, calculating eyes. You claim to be refugees from the Zylkran Empire? Jake nodded, playing the role of desperate fugitive perfectly. We escaped from a labor camp. Please, we just need sanctuary. We can provide intelligence on Zylkran operations. The officer studied them with obvious suspicion but ultimately followed protocol. They were stripped of weapons, searched thoroughly, and marched to the processing facility deep inside the fortress. Just as Jake had predicted, security was minimal here. The Vorath never expected threats from captured prisoners. Ben was watching everything, cataloging systems, counting guards, calculating angles. When they were placed in a holding cell, he immediately went to work on the environmental controls. His fingers flew across the alien interface with practiced ease. 17 minutes, he whispered. That's how long before I can trigger the cascade. The time crawled by. Guards passed their cell every 4 minutes like clockwork. Jake used the waiting period to study the facility layout, counting exits, identifying choke points. Maya was doing the same, her pilot's instincts mapping three-dimensional space even inside a building. Then Ben nodded. Cascade initiated. 47 seconds starting now. Jake counted silently. At 30 seconds, alarms began blaring throughout the fortress. At 40 seconds, he heard the distinctive sound of shield generators powering down. At 45 seconds, Maya's voice crackled through the concealed communicator Kaida had smuggled to them. I'm through the gap. Heading to your position now. The explosion that followed rattled the entire structure. Maya had blown through 3 interior walls with the transport's forward cannons, carving a direct path to the processing facility. The holding cell door was standard security, never meant to hold determined prisoners. When the power failed, Leo kicked it open with one brutal strike. They poured into the corridor and immediately encountered resistance. Vorath guards responded with trained efficiency, but Jake's team had the element of surprise and the advantage of unpredictability. They fought like cornered animals, using tactics no military academy would teach. Nina threw a smoke grenade and then charged through it in the wrong direction, catching guards who expected logical retreat patterns. Carlos used a Vorath weapon against its own kind in ways the designers never intended. Leo fought with raw aggression that bordered on suicidal but somehow kept working. They fought their way deeper into the fortress, following Ben's directions toward the prisoner holding area. This was the part of the plan that had kept Jake awake during the flight. The mission objective was to destroy the fortress. But his intelligence had indicated the Vorath held thousands of prisoners here, including humans and other species the Empire had lost track of. He'd faced an impossible choice: complete the mission and doom the prisoners, or save them and fail the wager. So he'd chosen a third option that violated every military principle he'd ever learned. They would do both simultaneously. "Maya, how much explosive do we have on the transport?" Jake asked through the communicator as they ran. "Enough to level this place twice over." "Why? New plan. We're splitting up. Leo, Nina, Carlos, you're with me. We're getting the prisoners out. Ben, you're setting charges at the structural weak points. Maya, you're providing air support and extraction coordination." "That's suicide," Leo protested. "We don't have enough people." "We don't have enough people to do this the smart way, so we're doing it the impossible way." "Ben, can you override the prison systems?" Ben's fingers were already moving across his datapad, splicing into the fortress network through the damaged security systems. "Yes. I'm opening all cells now." Chaos erupted throughout the facility. Thousands of prisoners, some held for years, poured into corridors they thought they'd never leave. The Vorath guards tried to contain the riot, but found themselves overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Jake's team moved through the madness like ghosts, directing prisoners toward the transport bay while Ben planted explosives at critical structural points. Maya provided cover fire from above, her piloting skills turning the transport into a deadly weapon that kept Vorath reinforcements pinned down. They lost Nina in a firefight on the 3rd level. She went down covering a group of civilian prisoners, taking 7 guards with her. Carlos took a shot to the shoulder but kept moving. Leo's armor was scorched and dented, but he fought like a machine. The evacuation was proceeding faster than Jake had dared hope. Prisoners were cramming into stolen Vorath shuttles, into cargo holds, into anything that could fly. Maya coordinated the exodus with precision that would have impressed any traffic controller. Then the Vorath commander made his appearance. He was twice the size of his guards, covered in battle scars and radiating pure fury. "You dare violate the sanctity of this fortress with trickery and cowardice?" Jake faced him with weapons drawn. "You should surrender now. Your fortress is rigged to explode in 4 minutes." The commander laughed. "Empty threats from a primitive species. You think I fear death?" "No," Jake admitted, "but I think you fear dying pointlessly. Your honor means something to you. There's no honor in getting blown up, because you were too stubborn to recognize when you'd been beaten by a better strategy." The commander's expression darkened. For a moment, Jake thought he'd overplayed his hand. Then the massive warrior lowered his weapon slightly. "You fight without honor, but you fight well. If you had come as warriors seeking glorious battle, I would have killed you all. But you came as something I did not expect. For that, you have earned survival today." He turned and barked orders to his remaining forces. The Vorath began evacuating their own fortress, their pride wounded but their lives intact. Jake watched them go, then checked his timer. 2 minutes remained. "Everyone out now," he shouted into the communicator. "Ben, tell me those charges are set to remote detonation." "Affirmative. I'm on the last transport now." Jake, Leo, and Carlos were the last 3 humans in the fortress. They sprinted toward the docking bay where Maya had positioned the final evacuation shuttle. The structure groaned around them as Ben's explosives began their preliminary damage, weakening supports in preparation for the final collapse. They reached the shuttle with 30 seconds remaining. Maya was at the controls, her face streaked with sweat and blood from a gash on her forehead. "Get in! Get in! Get in!" The shuttle lurched into space just as Ben triggered the main detonation sequence. The Vorath fortress, impregnable for a decade, collapsed in on itself in a brilliant cascade of explosions. Secondary detonations rippled through the structure as power cores failed and weapon systems overloaded. The shuttle's cockpit was silent except for heavy breathing. Then Carlos started laughing, a sound that bordered on hysterical. "We did it. We actually did it. We lost Nina," Leo said quietly. Jake nodded. "We lost Nina, and her sacrifice saved 3,000 lives. She died a hero." Maya piloted them back toward the rendezvous point where Kaida waited with the main Zylkran transport. The rescued prisoners followed in a ragged convoy of stolen ships. As they approached, Jake could see Kaida standing at the viewport watching them arrive. When they docked, she was waiting with medical teams and supplies, but her expression was troubled. "You succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. But Lord Thane is calling for your execution anyway. He claims you violated the terms by saving prisoners instead of simply destroying the fortress." "We did both," Jake protested. "He doesn't care. He's convinced the Queen that you prioritized human lives over the mission objective, proving that humans cannot be trusted to follow orders. Your trial begins the moment we return to the capital." The journey back was tense. The freed prisoners were grateful, but Jake's team knew they were flying toward potential execution. Ben ran probability calculations obsessively. Maya cleaned her weapons in angry silence. Leo and Carlos played cards with hands that shook slightly. Kaida spent most of the trip in communication with contacts at the capital. When she emerged from her quarters, her expression was grim. "The court is divided. About 40% support Lord Thane's position. Another 40% are genuinely impressed by what you accomplished. The remaining 20% are waiting to see which way the Queen leans." "And the Queen?" Jake asked. "She hasn't said a word since receiving the mission reports. Nobody knows what she's thinking." They arrived at the capital to find the Judgment Hall packed with nobles, military officers, and observers from across the Empire. News of the mission had spread rapidly. Some called Jake's team heroes. Others demanded their immediate execution for insubordination. Queen Elara sat motionless on her throne as they were marched into the chamber. This time, Jake's team stood together, unbowed, despite their chains. The freed prisoners had been transported to a separate facility, but their presence loomed large over the proceedings. Lord Thane wasted no time launching his attack. "Your Majesty, these criminals have proven exactly what I warned against. They disregarded the mission parameters to pursue their own agenda. They saved prisoners when ordered to destroy a fortress. This is proof that humans cannot be trusted with responsibility." General Corvin rose to counter. "With respect, Lord Thane, they accomplished both objectives. The fortress is destroyed. The prisoners are freed. They achieved more than our best warriors have managed in 10 years. Through trickery and deception, through innovation and strategic brilliance," Kaida interjected, "they saw a solution where we saw only mutually exclusive options. That is precisely the kind of thinking we need." The debate raged for over an hour. Jake watched Queen Elara's face, trying to read some hint of her thoughts, but she remained inscrutable. Finally, she raised her hand for silence. "Captain Voss, approach." Kaida walked forward and knelt before the throne. Queen Elara studied her for a long moment. "You wagered your life on this mission. The terms were clear. Success means reconsidering our treatment of humans. But Lord Thane raises a valid point. They did not follow the mission as stated. Your Majesty, the mission as stated was impossible. What they did instead was achieve the impossible. Isn't that more valuable?" Queen Elara turned her attention to Jake. "Come forward!" Jake approached the throne, his chains rattling with each step. When he stood before her, she descended from her platform again, studying him with those 4 piercing eyes. "You lost one of your team members," she said quietly. "Nina Ross. She died saving civilians. Tell me, Jake Morrison, if you had to choose between completing the mission and saving those prisoners, which would you have chosen?" Jake met her gaze without flinching. "I would have chosen the prisoners, every time. Because that's what humans do. We don't leave people behind, even when it's tactically stupid. Even when it costs us everything. Even when it means failing and facing execution. Especially then. Queen Elara was silent for a long moment, then she turned to address the entire court. I have heard arguments from both sides. I have reviewed the mission data extensively. I have consulted with advisors and military experts, and I have reached a decision that will reshape this empire. The chamber fell absolutely silent. Lord Thane leaned forward, confident of victory. Kaida kept her expression neutral, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. For too long we have treated humans as inferior beings, Queen Elara began. We conquered their world and told ourselves it was justified because they were primitive. We enslaved them and called it mercy. We ignored their potential and called it wisdom. But Jake Morrison and his team have proven that our assumptions were catastrophically wrong. Lord Thane's face darkened, but he remained silent. They accomplished what our best warriors could not. They saved thousands of lives we had written off as acceptable losses. They demonstrated strategic thinking that our military academies failed to teach. And they did it all while facing certain death with courage that humbles me. Queen Elara turned to face Jake directly. Therefore, I am issuing the following decree, effective immediately. All human prisoners in labor camps across the Empire are to be freed. They will be granted citizenship status and full legal rights. Those with skills will be integrated into our military, our government, and our society as equals. The court erupted. Half the nobles shouted in outrage. The other half looked stunned. Lord Thane rose from his seat, his voice thundering. Your Majesty, this is madness. You cannot elevate an entire species based on one mission. I can and I will. But that's not all. Queen Elara's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. I am also proposing a formal alliance between the Zylkran Empire and the human people. To seal this alliance and demonstrate my commitment to this new direction, I will take Jake Morrison as my consort. We will marry in a formal ceremony that binds our species together as partners, not conquerors and conquered. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Kaida's eyes went wide. Lord Thane looked like he might have a stroke. Even the guards seemed shocked. Your Majesty, Jake managed to say. I don't understand. Queen Elara's expression softened slightly. Our empire has grown stagnant, Jake Morrison. We have become predictable, rigid, and arrogant. You and your people represent everything we lack. Adaptability, creativity, and the courage to choose compassion over expedience. By joining our species in marriage, I am making a statement that cannot be ignored or reversed. Humans are not slaves. They are our equals. They are our future, but you don't even know me. I know you chose to save 3,000 lives when it would have been easier to let them die. I know you inspired loyalty in people who had every reason to give up hope. I know you solved problems we couldn't, fought battles we lost, and succeeded where we failed. That is enough. She extended her hand to him. The choice is yours, Jake Morrison. Accept my proposal and help me transform an empire. Or refuse, and I will respect your decision and grant you freedom regardless. But know that if you accept, you will be walking into a storm. There will be assassination attempts, political opposition, and constant danger. Many of my people will never accept this change. Jake looked at his team. Maya was grinning. Ben looked fascinated by the political implications. Leo and Carlos seemed stunned but supportive. Kaida nodded slightly, encouraging him. He thought about Nina, who died believing that this mission could change something. He thought about the thousands of humans still suffering who might have hope now. He thought about the impossible choice before him and realized it wasn't really a choice at all. Jake took the Queen's hand. I accept. The chamber exploded with noise, but Queen Elara simply smiled and pulled him closer. Then let it be known, across the Empire, today marks the beginning of a new era. Humans and Zylkrans, united as one people. And anyone who opposes this will answer to both of us. Lord Thane stormed from the hall, along with about a third of the nobles. But the rest remained, some curious, some calculating, some genuinely excited by the possibilities. General Corvin approached and bowed to Jake with respect that would have been unthinkable hours ago. Kaida stepped forward and knelt before both of them. Your Majesties, I pledge my service to this new alliance. Rise, Captain Voss, Queen Elara said warmly. You risked everything to make this possible. You will be honored as the architect of our empire's greatest transformation. As the court slowly cleared and preparations began for the coming changes, Jake stood beside Queen Elara and marveled at how quickly everything had shifted. 72 hours ago, he'd been facing execution. Now he was about to become consort to the most powerful ruler in the known galaxy. Maya approached with a knowing smile. So, you're marrying an alien queen and becoming royalty. Does this mean we have to start calling you Your Majesty? Call me that and I'll assign you to cleaning duty, Jake replied, but he was smiling. Ben was already calculating the political ramifications. This will destabilize approximately 47% of established power structures. Fascinating. Leo clapped him on the shoulder hard enough to hurt. You did good, man. Nina would be proud. Jake nodded, feeling the weight of that loss alongside the strange hope of what was coming. We all did good. This is just the beginning. Queen Elara's hand remained in his, warm and solid. Indeed it is. And it will not be easy, but together, I believe we can build something neither of our species could achieve alone. Jake looked out at the capital city stretching beyond the palace walls, at the millions of lives that would be affected by what happened today. He thought about all the impossible choices that had led to this moment, and the even more impossible choices that lay ahead. But for the first time since Earth fell, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Real, tangible hope that the future could be different. That humans could be more than slaves or victims. That two species could find common ground and build something new together. The ceremony would come later, along with the political battles, the resistance from conservative nobles, and the countless challenges of integrating two vastly different cultures. But right now, in this moment, Jake Morrison stood beside an alien queen who had gambled her empire on the belief that humans mattered, and he was determined to prove her right. The Judgment Hall had witnessed thousands of executions, but today it had witnessed something far more dangerous, the birth of genuine change. The Zylkran Empire would never be the same, neither would humanity. And somewhere in that uncertain future, Jake could almost hear Nina laughing, proud that her sacrifice had meant something after all. Queen Elara squeezed his hand gently. Ready to shock the galaxy? Jake squeezed back, always. And together they walked toward a future that neither species expected, but both desperately needed.